The Cannabis Heals Me Podcast, episode 81.
You're listening to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast, where we explore the real stories of real people who have discovered the profound healing properties of the cannabis plant in their own lives. Find more at cannabishealsme.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. This is your host, Rachel Kennerly. As always, recording at the Storybook Inn Studios. Glad to have you here for our Thursday educational episode. Now, we're not doing these every Thursday like we were a few months ago, so if you want to make sure that you always get the latest episode downloaded to your podcast app, you need to go out there and click on the subscribe button. So while you're out there subscribing, I also ask that you would go ahead and give us a rating or a review. And the reason I ask you to do that is not because I need the personal affirmation, although that's always nice to have positive compliments about your show. But the reason I ask you is because we want to get these episodes out to more people. And one of the ways that we can do that is by the podcast app that you're using, recommending the show to other people. So if you go out there and give us a rating or a review, that boosts us in the algorithms. And the more reviews, the more ratings we get, the more people will actually get this podcast recommended to them by the podcast app. So without having to spend a penny on advertising, that helps us get the word out about the podcast. So while you're subscribing to the show, make sure you go out there and give us a rating or a review. And if you review the show, I will be happy to read that review on the air. And while you're in the subscribing spirit, go out and subscribe to our email list, cannabishealsme.com/subscribe. Type your email address in, press the enter button, and boom, you're on our email list. And that gives us a way to contact you directly without having to worry about Facebook, Instagram, or whatever social media app that you might be using to see our content filtering us and not getting our information to you. So head on out to cannabishealsme.com/subscribe and get signed up for our email newsletter list. Our guest today, Matt Grimshaw, likes to call himself an accidental activist. And what he means by this is that while he was studying to become an American citizen, he's not from America originally, he actually stumbled across the issue of veteran suicide and PTSD and decided he wanted to do something to shine a brighter light on the issue. Now, about the same time, he ran across an article about a veteran in Colorado who was able to reduce his pill intake from 47 a day to 5 or 6 thanks to this miraculous little plant called cannabis. Now, Matt's been a documentary addict from childhood, and he makes his living as a freelance videographer. So he talked to his client, Monster Gardens, about possibly doing a live grow show with a military veteran as the grower. A few months later, Matt showed up on the door of Al, a Vietnam vet in California, and spent a year teaching him how to grow medical cannabis. And he documented this journey for a documentary series called Vets Grow. Matt's got another project that he wants to start with veterans across the country in 2020, and he's coming on the show to talk about both the Vets Grow project and also this new project that he has in mind. Matt, welcome to the program.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you for having me. How are you today?
Oh, I can't complain. I mean, I'm not doing as well as somebody that's sitting in California, but, not too bad here in Texas in November.
I don't know. At least you're not on fire. That's probably what more at the moment.
Or have the power grid shut off. So we're in that instance, we're doing real well.
Excellent.
Kurt Robbins, I had interviewed him a couple weeks ago, and he tagged me and you in a post. And I clicked on a link that you had posted in response to his tagging and saw a cool program that you're involved with, or a documentary that you've created called Vets Grow. And I wanted to have you come on and talk to us about this documentary and maybe tell us a little bit about how it got started and how it all came together.
Sure. Happy to. It's a weird story because as my accent will probably give you a hint of, I'm probably the wrong person to be talking about veteran issues. But the article itself is, I think, the one that's on High Times. And I post those called An Accidental Activist because that's exactly how it all happened. So I'm an immigrant US citizen who bumped into the issue of veteran suicide and PTSD while I was studying my civics, studied for my civics test to become a US citizen. I've been a documentary addict since I was a very, very small boy. And so now I have an ambition to try and make my own. And I was in the middle of researching I'd watched just about everything Ken Burns has ever made. middle of researching that, and you can't really separate a lot of American history from that of its veterans, including the VA from the Civil War onwards. And I stumbled into an article that talked about veteran suicide, which at the time was believed to be around, I think, 22 a day. This is the famous number that went around a few years ago. And it, to be honest with you, it was like being punched in the face, because I've always had a close affinity to veterans from growing up in London. One of my neighbours' dads, he was in the 8th Army, a desert rat, and I'd always been around veterans my whole life. They were just, I guess, the accepted norm. Hearing stories about the Battle of Britain and all of the daring do, minus the dangerous stuff, of course. I was very young at the time, but I'd always have had a reverence for veterans, and so finding out that veterans were committing suicide at such, I mean, it's twice the national rate, was a real shock, but not as bad the shock as all of the other stuff I found out when I started digging deeper about the opiate crisis. We've got 60,000 veterans addicted. Just veterans in general, they're completely abandoned once they're transitioning out from being veterans to civilians. And it's it's as someone that was going through the process of becoming an American at the time, it really stuck in the throat compared to the thanks for your service you sort of get at every football match or baseball match. Mm-hmm. When the reality was, there's a lot of people out there hurting. And I mean, outlined by the fact that I think it's the numbers, 25% of all people on the streets have served. And for men, it's, I think, 1/3. And so everyone else, I've driven around the streets and seen a sign saying, "Hungry vet, please help." And, you get very, very, I guess, used to that sort of thing if you live in a city like I did growing up. But it never occurred to me that that was probably legit. This probably was a veteran, and it stunned me. So at the same time, I discovered all of this, going through the process of becoming an American. I've been a freelance videographer for about 5 or 6 years, and I work with, at the time I was working on running the Monster Gardens YouTube channel, which is one of the more well-known sort of grow your own garden education channels, with about 55,000, 60,000 subscribers.
Now let me pause you right there. Now, when you refer to garden, are you talking about vegetable gardens, or are you talking about gardens for growing cannabis?
Yes, it's Cannabis Gardens. So Monster Gardens were one of the few people that was not destroyed in the great YouTube cull, because they started, I think, in 2009, and they'd always avoided showing plant or being specific. It was just a channel about products and how they worked and how to use them and media. And then they would use other plants in place, of similar genus to get around with that, because they realized that, while it's Schedule 1, you're basically sticking your head up above a very big hole and asking for it to get cut off.
Yeah.
So they did that for years and years and years, and that was part of this story. 2017, obviously, we knew that 2018 was coming, and it was going to be legalized. And so they were talking to me for the first time about doing a real live grow show, which they'd never wanted to do before, for the reason of, people getting kicked off. So I was creating a show, a concept for literally me to learn to grow in my garden, while I found out about veteran suicide. And then I stumbled across another article that talked about veterans self-medicating with cannabis. And it's specifically, I've tried to find this article. It's actually a printed off article from something online, and I've never found the printout. But the article was talking about a guy in Colorado who, again, who was on, shall we say, the right-leaning side of the spectrum politically, and so didn't believe in cannabis as a medicine, and looked at it as a very Spicoli type approach to cannabis. But he'd lost both his legs in an IED, an improvised explosive device in Afghanistan. And after having his life saved and flown back, he was on 47 different opiates to control pain, to control depression, anxiety, all of the other stuff. And basically, he didn't seem to have any life. And the article talked about the fact he'd taken his own life, and then someone tried to suggest cannabis, and he finally agreed to it. And it was like one of the miracle stories you read about, and he'd gotten down to like 5 or 6 opiates, and he could, now live by himself and function by himself. But the caveat to that was he now had a $1,600 to $1,800 a month habit. And for someone whose parents are both disabled back in the UK, I grew up understanding what it was like to live on a very limited income. And so there's no way these veterans could possibly sustain that. With taxes being what they are in all the legal states, I simply thought it was a give a man a fish moment, teach a man to fish.
Yes.
And I realized that I had it in my power to actually do something about it. And this is the reason I call myself an accidental activist. I hate to give the impression that I went out there all with daring do trying to help. I was just bumbling along like a regular schmo, and I just happened to bump into this purely by accident. And it for personal reasons, it triggered me and made me extremely active. So I convinced my client to give me the filming budget for a year, and a whole bunch of other companies to give me a whole bunch of free stuff, and spent the next year teaching a Vietnam veteran called Al to grow his own medical cannabis at home, and the transformative effect that had on both him, his neighborhood, and my own transformation, because I knew nothing about veterans going into this project, but I dived all the way in. I had a medical consultant who was a Vietnam veteran, actually worked on the first Navy drugs program back in the 60s, called Dr. Larry Bedard. I bumped into all sorts of veteran groups, a group called Hardcore Security, who actually transported the 6 clones from Harborside, where we purchased them for free.
Wow, that's awesome.
To Al's place in Santa Rosa, which was 70 miles away. And it's a company that's just 100% owned and run by veterans that transports cannabis around legal states like California. So there was all sorts of interesting subplots and stories that went on with that, and it just radically changed my life. And now, at the end of VetsGrow, I tried to sort of get back to my regular existence, and I've never been able to step away. I had no real veteran friends before getting involved with it, and now half my friends are veterans that I have never even met, and they call me from Missouri and from Arizona and Colorado and New York and Maine. Across the country, it's connected me with a whole bunch of people that are extremely desperate. And so, to cut a very long story short, I'm trying to take the whole project national next year with a 20,000-mile ride called Take the High Road, filmed. It will take about 4 months, and we plan to have me on my motorcycle, which, if you watch the first season, will be explained. There's a lot of motorbikes in it. It's a weird plot twist, but I'll let you find it. But basically, I'm going to do a lap of the country on a motorbike, chased smoking a bandit style with a big delivery truck full of 100 more of these VetsGrows, indoor 5x5 tents, and deliver them wherever it's legal, and hopefully set up another 100 veterans with their own medical supply, their own YouTube channel as well, to really try and get things kicked off. And along the way, the idea is to really just kick up a stink across the country, go to events, get involved with local news, harass politicians maybe.
Awesome.
See if I can veterans to come, maybe Rolling Thunder come and ride with me or something. Anything along those sorts of lines. It's designed to be a sort of free-for-all, to just ask if America will take the high road, because it's an election year next year. We're in the most, shall we say, flexible political time I've ever seen, definitely in my lifetime, where seemingly anything goes. And I think it's a message that really America needs to sit up and listen to, because I can tell you from personal experience, if you think that veterans are doing well here, you're in America, just because they've got the VA, you're in for a big shock. I mean, for instance, only 18% of veterans even use it. So there's a disconnect of mass amounts. And I really should check that number for quoting it and getting beaten up by the VA. But I'm pretty sure it's damn low. I'm trying to quote from memory here, so if necessary, I'll let you know.
All right. We'll issue a retraction if necessary.
Fantastic, thank you. But it's really this. I think one of the other things I'm working on at the moment is actually I would have talked to you about this offline, is a podcast to introduce civilians and veterans, because one of the side effects of the whole veteran experience I went through last year was realizing that America, since the draft ended in the 70s, has basically created a military class. And so those people that are veterans are either from veteran families, or they're if I'm honest, they're poor. They've got no choice. It's an escape route for them. And so, as someone that was born and raised in the class system, trust me, the flags are waving in my head. I recognize class systems when I see one. And so I'm trying to set up some ideals whereby I can introduce some of these veterans that literally they just reached out to me from nowhere just because they saw this show, and we're just so thankful for a civilian doing anything about it, because most veterans, I think a lot of the anonymity and sort of disparity between civilians and veterans just feel abandoned, because I think most of them, as an example, this is an extreme example from a Navy SEAL I spoke to, who should remain nameless because has to get into the Navy SEALs, he told me, 8 weeks basic, which is what everyone in the military goes through, and then I think 14 or 15 months advanced training, and then he spent 11 years as a SEAL, and then it was 5 weeks, and he was back on the street. And that was a decent amount of time. I've talked to people that's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and there's no readjustment programs and no rehab programs. They go from being active service to hitting an America that, quite frankly, if you've been overseas for a couple of years and you came back to the America you see now, what would your impression be? The disillusionment factor is very, very high.
Hey guys, wanted to tell you real quick about our podcast host and sponsor, Anchor.fm. If you're thinking about starting your own podcast, I highly recommend Anchor. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. They'll distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go out to Anchor.fm to get started. That's Anchor.fm. Now back to the show. It's a lot like Rumpelstiltskin, because the technology changes so much. The environment shifts so quickly now. If you've been overseas for 2 or 3 years, you come back and the landscape is very different than it was when you left.
Barely recognizable for a lot of these guys, and a lot of them re-sign up and go back. But I've met so many different ages of veterans now, and this is one of the other big surprises from my perspective. When you say the word veterans, it creates an image of a sort of singular, unified group, and that's far from the case. Vietnam and veterans tend to stay around with career veterans, and then you have Gulf War veterans, and then you have the more sort of modern Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans, and they generally, I wouldn't say they fight, but there's definitely some barriers between them that I think are really it's one of the things I hope to try and solve at some point, because there's a lot of lessons that the older guys can pass down. I mean, one of the guys I interviewed, who is the head of a Sonoma group called Vet Connect, a charity, who was interviewed in the first episode. He's the first guy you see on screen, Rick. He explained that it took him almost 30 years to even really get to grips with the PTSD he'd experienced. Wow. On 4 tours as a brown water Navy vet. So he was basically Apocalypse Now, but for real.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of experience that doesn't get worked out in a few days or few years or anything. And a lot of the younger guys I talk to be honest with you, you can see they're on the road. They're on a process to coming to terms with it and to healing. So, I mean, really, cannabis is one, shall we say, tool in a very large box that's necessary to try and help veterans come to terms with it, especially combat veterans. But everyone that served seemed to have traumas of some sort. I mean, for instance, have you ever heard of the initials MST? It's the military term for military sexual trauma. And the rate amongst female veterans, I think, is 25% or 24%.
Wow.
and it's the rate amongst men is unquoted, but it's there. It's just not really being talked about, and
Right.
it's one of these rabbit holes. The moment you start scratching, you can go down deep, 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 and that's really why I wanted to try and bring a lot of this to the country's attention. Cannabis is just it's a tool in the box, but we need behavioral therapy. We need some sort of program that helps veterans transition back. I mean, we spend millions of dollars creating soldiers, but next to no money helping them translate the skills and experiences back into civilian life. And really, this is why you tend to find another character building of this military class of veteran companies. Veterans generally tend to work with veterans because they understand each other. And I think there's a lot of stigma that is attached to it that I can tell you from personal experience is unjustified. And it harms, I think, us as a nation of, the ultimate mixing pot of immigrants and people with vastly different experiences. Being in the military is, I guess, part of the ultimate American experience when you fight for the nation. And it saddens me greatly that they feel abandoned. And that's the impression I got from what I still get from most of the veterans that I talk to.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had several veterans come on the show to talk about PTSD and how cannabis helps them. And the ones that have come out and they're successful, they always emphasize the importance of building your tribe and building a community with people that have had similar experiences, so that you can, they know where they're coming from. Their wife, who was here while they were stationed abroad, she doesn't understand what someone might have went through when they were overseas. But they said it's important to really build your community and surround yourself with people that understand where you're coming from and can help talk you through those experiences and those hard days.
And I think that's the same. You're exactly right. And I think that's the same for everyone that's affected, because I was lucky enough, Rick and his wife, Pat, I interviewed both of them for the show. So Pat has PTSD for her own personal reasons, but she was not a veteran. But they were married for 22 plus years, had 2 kids. And she was very, I think in episode 7 or 8, she was very frank about the gravitational impact PTSD has, not only on the sufferer themselves, but the impact it has on everyone that's in close location, friends, family, neighbors, and everyone, because it has knock-on effects. I mean, there's kids that don't know their parents. There's all sorts of knock-on side effect, unforeseen circumstances that are caused, and these are real effects that create all sorts of issues further down the line, and they're generally just, I don't know, papered over with very, very thin tissue of I don't know, solemnity or something. It's one of the reasons I really do. Since starting this, the whole "thank you for your service" is something I refuse to actually say. I really changed that to I if I come across a veteran, I thank them for what they've given to the country, because that's, especially combat veterans, exactly what's happened. All the guys and ladies I've spoken to, they go as one person and come back as someone else when they go to a theatre of war, and that's the reality of it. And it's trying to mitigate their experiences with those they're going to face back here and why they happened. And it's something that takes decades to get through. So I mean, there's a really, really good in my travels, I bumped into, as I said, a whole bunch of veterans. There's a wonderful gentleman called Matt Carl, who I think had a documentary launched, where are we, about a week or 2 ago, called From Shock to Awe. And he's into psychedelics, and he actually takes PTSD sufferers down to South America on vision quests. It's amazing work. And I think my biggest and most exciting thing about cannabis psychedelics it is the potential here to really do amazing things to help PTSD sufferers. I mean, Rick in I can't remember which part of the episode I edited it into, but he said something very, very prosaic. This is the Vietnam veteran. he said, PTSD is a very common thing. It's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. And you can get that from, a car accident or something violent happening to you. But the reason it continues to manifest itself in veterans for such a long time is it's the repeated daily incidences of PTSD day after day after day, to the point where they become commonplace and they're just every day. And that's where it really becomes so bad for a lot of the combat veterans, is the flashbacks and stuff. And so having something instant like cannabis to help is really, it's a small miracle that I'm glad I'm seeing in my lifetime. I just really want to help push it over the final barrier, because the major challenges facing veterans are the same ones challenging most medical users. It's still a Schedule 1 drug, which is stupid. If we're honest, you look at what schedules the Schedule 1 description is versus what cannabis to be, that's just insanity.
Right. The fact that, they want to say that there's no medicinal benefits is complete and utter BS.
Yes, it's nonsense. I mean, you can go on YouTube right now and see people with Parkinson's disease that in 12 minutes can, function almost regularly without any shakes and stuff. I mean, it's not nonsense. I mean, we don't know how good it is because we're not allowed to even research it. I mean, I had the wonderful luck in my travels last year to bump into an amazing lady called Dr. Sue Sisley, who's working in Arizona on what was the biggest PTSD trial. I've only talked to her for a very brief period of time, and even that was because she was friends with Dr. Larry Bedard, someone I worked with. But her work is, potentially groundbreaking. And I mean, this is the other side of the equation from the American capitalist perspective, is America really should be the world leader in cannabis and cannabis research and hemp and all of this sort of stuff. And while we're messing around with this, the rest of the world's getting a jump on it. And if we do want to bring an awful lot more jobs and commercial activity back to America, I can't see a bigger, riper fruit for the picking for America. So,
absolutely, and it's one of the biggest growing sectors in the United States. And I can't, if we legalized it everywhere, it would just the flood of jobs that it would bring to the market, and most of those jobs pay higher than average.
Yeah, there will be fallouts. I mean, obviously, the pushback is the alcohol lobbies, and I mean, it's obvious what's happening in Kentucky, where the Farm Bill went through, and then suddenly all the tobacco growers could grow hemp. I mean, I could almost see the tobacco hemp transition, cigarette marketplace happening before our eyes. And I have no real problem with that. That's just people's, I guess, free liberties. If you want to smoke a cigarette and kill yourself, that's up to you. Same as drink to drink. I see no difference between any of those. But it's the meted way, or the metered way that they're trying to stage it, that disturbs me, because another of the big fears I have is that they'll reschedule cannabis to be a pharmaceutical only drug.
You get the FDA involved, and that's going to muck it all up for everybody.
Right. Dr. Sue, I think, sued the FDA for supplying crap weed or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think she might have actually won that. The last I heard, she had. I mean, but you talked about the amazing breakthroughs that she's making, and she's making that with basically ditch weed. So.
And that's what really, really, I guess, rubs my back up. So I used to be in tech before I got into film. I was a science publisher in industries like the compute chip and solar panel stuff. So I know how this sort of innovation mechanism works. And I'm telling you, we've got an opportunity right here for America to be the world leader in everything that comes out from it, from hempcrete to, the billions of polymers that are potentially coming out of hemp, and then the pharmaceutical cornucopia that could come out of cannabis. I mean, every time I open up a science journal, they found another couple of hundred cannabinoids or something.
Yeah.
And it's obvious we don't really know what the hell we're talking about with cannabis, and it really does need researching. So all of this is of course the politics of our time, because there's no way of making something that all of our leaders have told us is going to kill us in 10 seconds flat.
Right.
Or was it Dr. Phil said on Twitter yesterday, or was it today? He said, cannabis is like pouring liquid on your computer or something like that.
Oh, it's some ridiculous reefer madness stuff. It's like, come on, Phil, you ought to know better than that.
Right. I mean, it's obvious that you know pockets are being lined with conversations like this, but it's the moment it's gotten to the point where it's really silly now. I mean, there's just too much evidence out there, and it's now obvious what it is. It's just a money thing. It's just people trying to protect their yard, which I understand. That's free market economics, but
But on the flip side of that, you've got people that are in desperate need of it for, physical health conditions and mental health conditions. And then you got people that are guarding the trough like a dog on a manger and not allowing sick people to get access to this plant that they need.
Right. I mean, that was the most asinine thing to me about the law that passed in 2018. When it passed here, the only way they could get it passed was with a little side note that didn't allow free donations of cannabis to be tax exempt. And so I worked with a guy called, well, he's known here as Sweetleaf Joe. I interviewed him at a trade show, and he told me all about this sort of story and led me down a whole different bunny red path. And he worked tirelessly the whole of that 2018 and managed to get the damn law passed that would discount, cannabis. And then the governor, just as he was leaving, vetoed it because Jerry Brown had always been anti-cannabis, and now it looks like the law's going to get passed by the current governor here. And that was going to help an awful lot of people. But in the meantime, I'll be honest, we've lost people. People needed it have gone. And the fact that they suffered more than they needed to really, really rubs me up the wrong way.
Oh, absolutely.
Grab the cat by the tail and just brush it down. And it's for no other reason than people's lack of understanding as to what cannabis is and the constant propaganda program that almost every government colluded with on the face of the earth to tell us it was, the devil's plant for nearly 100 years. So there's a lot to be undone, and my personal sort of mission is simply veterans, and I find it's a simple way to look at it. If we can help veterans, everyone gets help that way. So it's what I'm just spending all my time doing at the moment, and I welcome interviews like this and anyone that wants to talk to me about it. I've had a rude awakening myself, as has just about anyone else that knows me, because I talk about pretty much nothing but veteran stuff all the time now, and I guess I just need to perhaps convert another 300 million Americans before we can make a difference. But, Rome wasn't built in a day, and there's an awful lot of this very big country to go and see. So the simple idea is to go out and try and see America and tell America about it by physically going there. I mean, what the hell's more American than a road trip, right?
That's right. That's right. Especially Smokey and the Bandit style. That's awesome.
Are you kidding? It was, funnily enough, it's. I don't want to spoiler alert for the final episode, but it was actually Eastbound and Down playing on my helmet radio that sort of mind flash as I was riding home from the last day of filming, because it had been bothering me. Veterans have been going into this whole project. I was super nervous because I realized, I sound like I sound like. I'd been an American for approximately a month, and most people that I told the idea to thought I was completely stark raving mad. I called 4 or 5 different veterans groups before anyone called me back, and it was a very local group, and that was the Veterans Cannabis Group here in Marin. A wonderful gentleman called Aaron Augustus, who he responded. He said, "Yeah, let's talk," and we talked for about an hour and a half on Boxing Day, and he told me, sorry, this is a Boxing Day, 26th of December, day after Christmas, and he thought I was completely mad until I sent him a 3-page email with all of the plans and everyone I talked to, and he thought, okay, he is mad, but he's serious, and he helped me, and the rest is history. So since that day, really, I talk to veterans every day. Some of them are really good friends, and there are some stories out there that would just make your toes curl. Um, NCIS. Seen stuff like that. I've heard stories of drug dealing on bases and all sorts. I've literally had this sort of awakening moment, almost like of, I guess, Matrix proportions, where when you finally open your eyes and you look around, you start to see issues everywhere, and you start to see how they're interwoven with American culture and American society itself. And so really the veteran issue, there's 22.5 million veterans in this country. That's 8% of the population. And I don't think most Americans that are, at least first or second generation, have family members that have been served somewhere, or friends. I mean, everyone knows someone. It's quintessentially American to a degree, but it's, for some reason, it's the military specifically, and specifically veterans, have become perceived as this line item in an accountant's budget, when I've always had a very different perspective. Anyone that joins the military signs a sort of unwritten contract of, I'll fight for the nation as long as the nation will fight for me, should the worst go wrong, or once I'm done, it's the deal. I mean, obviously it's not as bad as the Roman army, 20 years, but it's still part of the bargain. And I think the biggest problem I have with the current situation is literally, it's a debt that we're letting American veterans down on, and it bothers me a great deal. And I've only been in America for 2 years, so I can't imagine it wouldn't bother anyone else, especially those that have people that are close to the military. So that's pretty much my sort of modus operandi. I'm just trying to create awareness of both the fact that I'm a personal cannabis user, have been since I was young. For me, my connection into cannabis was through migraines, which I suffered as a teenager. And I'd been exposed to cannabis at a young age, just recreationally, past the doobie, behind a bike shed sort of thing. Same as 100 million other stories out there. But it never made the connection until one day I got my trigger warnings, which is a sort of fluttery thing behind one of my eyelids, that I was going to get a migraine. And I happened to have a joint handy, so I smoked it and I didn't get the migraine.
Wow.
And it was a stunning revelation to me. And so I did it again, and it worked again. And for the next, I think, 3 to 5 years, I did it regularly, and it worked 9 times out of 10. And I'm not a doctor, and I don't want to do the whole causation correlation argument.
I've got a disclaimer at the end, so you're all good.
Well, I mean, my personal experience isn't to be explained to anyone else, but I stopped having them at 24, 25 years old. They just stopped completely. I just never have had them anymore. On the other side of the argument, I come from a family that are still back in the UK of, to be frank, walking medical dictionaries. My mother's got osteoporosis and mycemia and rheumatoid arthritis. My sister's got fibromyalgia. Both my parents have got diabetes, and my whole family is full of people that could be helped by cannabis. I mean, insanely helped. I think it would up their quality of life 150%. But UK, it's even worse than it is here. It's a complete joke over there, because it's already been buried in medicine and the NHS, and so they can stop people from gaining their own access over there quite easily, and then pump it out through pharmaceutical companies like GW. And I've been in contact with several ladies and an awful lot of parents over there who are trying to treat their kids for seizures and epilepsy.
Yeah, I've seen, because it's been 2 years since it was legalized there, and people still don't have access to it.
Oh, these people are selling their own houses.
Wow.
I know of several wonderful mothers who are going to Amsterdam regularly and coming back with oils and stuff and getting them confiscated. They march down to Parliament. I mean, They're amazing people over there. This seems to be a global fight now, and really, to me, it centers around people's perception of cannabis. And real revelation I had from making Vets Grow was people's reaction to it as a live plant, because I'd been using cannabis on and off, as long as I could remember, in various parts of the world, in Amsterdam and where it's legal in all sorts of places. But when I moved here in 2003 was the first time I started bumping into like professionals, lawyers and salespeople, and everyone was doing it, under the shush, and it was almost like everyone knew a military style a way of avoiding drug detection and stuff like that, and it shattered the image of what cannabis users were for me. I was very the Spicoli image, the sort of Bill and Ted, and all that. And it's not that at all. It's professionals. It's regular people. It's no different to alcohol users or I don't know anything else that humanity uses. And so it made me realize that my own stigmas as a user had been used against me, and really it's the image of cannabis that has to change if we're going to really get change to be made. And the live plant seems to be the best way of doing that. The story that convinced me of this is actually during filming. It's really funny. So I ride a motorcycle to go and film Al at his residence, and so it's a big, fairly noisy BMW. It's not subtle. And then I have to spend 10 minutes unpacking all my camera gear off the panniers and tripod off the back and stuff. So it's a bit of a process, and it's obvious. And so the few times I showed up for filming, he lives in a cul-de-sac, so it got people's curtains twitching and stuff like that. And then we opened his garage up and built the 5x5 tent in his garage in open view, and the curtain twitching became almost like a metronome. Then when the big white armored van turned up with the plants, with the 6 clones to install those, and then we had a problem with thrips, and there was you could see cannabis plants from a distance through the garage doors and stuff. Everyone got really, really, really interested. It transformed from merely regular curtain twitching to the moment the bike would rum, rum, and turn up and I'd kick the kickstand out, suddenly the whole neighborhood would feel the need to go and take their dogs for a walk. Very slowly past Al's place. Yeah. And after a few more weeks, it got to the point where Al had talked to all of his neighbors and they'd all ask questions, and people started sticking their head around the door while the cameras were running. They didn't want to be on camera, but they weren't afraid of it anymore. Yeah. And the most amazing thing was how people reacted to, oh, is that it? They saw it as a plant, and suddenly it was like a spell was broken over them. Mm-hmm. All of the BS and the reefer madness and all of that nonsense just seemed to melt away, and half of them started going to the local dispensary. It really gave me a brand new insight into this. Everyone knows the other stereotype of the plant's such a healer, man, and this is what was interesting when your podcast came to me, because it really is. The plant is a living miracle, right. Not just as a medicine, but itself, what it does to people when they have a relationship with it is quite remarkable. And that's the most amazing thing you see with veterans. Al was playing classical music for these guys. He was waking up in the middle of the night to check on them. I mean, it was amazing as a transformative experience. And he explained it to me as, look, all the time, all of us veterans are basically taught it's all aggression and kill, and this is nature nurture. It's the opposite. And I discovered, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks into filming, that this is an idea that's already popped up. I just seem to be the first person to convince a veteran to do it on camera. There's a group in, I think, New England that does it. They call it cultivation therapy. And then I started bumping into all sorts of, other ways, in veteran cannabis farms and retreats that use cannabis to help veterans. And literally, I've got enough content now to fill a very big road trip. So that's basically the idea.
Yeah. Well, I know, some of the veterans that we work that have been on the podcast with me before, because a lot of them are in Texas and it's not legal to grow it here. And there's, repercussions, like you could lose your house if you're growing, because they'll try and layer on charges and make it seem like you were trying to sell it as well. But they'll have like, a vegetable garden, or, they'll grow just flowers. That seems to be so healing for them. So I can't even fathom if you were to show up and say, look, here's this medicine that you can grow for yourself, how much more special that would be.
Right. And again, it's that relationship. There's even a chap I'm working with out in Arizona, Daniel, who is working on a very innovative plan. Because there's also the one problem with growing is obviously you have to be physically capable. And I've always hated the idea of denying anyone that has any disabilities, the opportunity to grow. And Dan seems to have come up with a way of solving that by sort of a grow by proxy, whereby, they can grow and then have another veteran help them. And they can do it as sort of joint farm, as long as it's in certain zoned lands and stuff. And so that's being worked on right now. So I have no idea where the hell that is. But that's going to be on the Veterans Cannabis Group Arizona chapter page. I think they've got a whole bunch of stuff there. But there's innovative ideas coming out up and down the country. And I'm one of my missions is to, if I can get, this whole thing funded, and we're going to do a crowdfunder of some sort. I don't know how much. It's going to be in December, so I'm going to be filming that, and that's really why I started writing for High Times. I reached out to them and showed them what I was doing, and then they just let me write.
That's awesome.
Remarkable experience. I mean,
that's incredible.
It helps to have had a 16-year career as a publisher, because then I understand the lingo and how to get people in through the door. But having the outlet is great, and it allows me to do a whole bunch of other stuff, like potentially these veteran civilian podcasts as well. But the idea is to try and I tried originally. If you look at the timeline for the last episode of Vets Grow, where this Take the High Road idea was first described, I was going to do it this year. I was planning on just rolling straight out of what I was doing and just rolling straight into it. And I spent, oh God, the first half of the year talking to an awful lot of potential sponsors that didn't pan out at all. And all of them went exactly the same way. And that's how I know that 2019 hasn't been the best year for anyone in cannabis here in California. Is they all were talking to me. No one was scared about, funding or prices or anything. And then they all became black holes of email inboxes. Just the messages go in, they never escape again.
Yeah. Well, the rec seemed to put a damper on the cannabis market in California, because they just regulated it to death.
Oh my God. It's part of this ongoing struggle wherever I've seen it become legal. The first hurdle, to be faced in Texas, is to make it legal and to make it acceptable. And then it's the regulatory fight to make it fair. And I think that's what California's doing at the moment. It's going through that process, because the taxes here are ludicrous. Up to 45%.
Yeah. What sick person can afford to pay 45%? They get a little bit of a discount if it's for medicinal use, but still.
Right. But it's on both ends of the chains as well. Really, the unwritten story of the whole legalization of California cannabis is how much it's hurt the actual farmers themselves. It's farms, farming, living things, veterans. That seems to be my whole drive at the moment, and completely by accident. One day I woke up and just fell into it, and I didn't mean to. But it's been the most. I want to use several swear words, but I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding when I say it's been the most amazing experience of my life. Giving something back to a bunch of people who really, most veterans have given up expecting anything from civilians, and it breaks my heart to say that, but that's the truth of it. And so when a veteran or veteran group finally finds a civilian that goes out there, my God, do they welcome you in, like family. Are you a veteran yourself, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm not. I'm not. My dad's a Vietnam vet. But I have an appreciation for them because I feel like they're told you're going over to fight for our freedoms. And then when they come back here, they aren't even given the freedom to choose their medication.
But I mean, for people like your dad as well. I mean, when they came back, they were called unhuman and spat on, and all of it. I've heard every story from most of the Vietnam vets I've met up in Sonoma, and that caused a very deep rift for an awfully long time. And at least it doesn't do that to its vets anymore. But at the same time, there is this impression in the younger vets of just being used for political aim, and that really seems to run against an awful lot of what veterans believe, and really what a lot of the civic teachings of America tells us America's supposed to be about, is someone that's just dived down the civics rabbit hole with a 8-month crash course of Ken Burns. Yeah, there's an awful lot missing from these discussions that seems to be just blanketed over again by the thanks for your service sort of thing, and the flyovers and the hugging of flags.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm more interested in the back end now, in trying to heal people with whatever means necessary, frankly. I mean, I've never been really a prohibitionist, but I've never wanted to go anywhere really further than cannabis in my own medical needs or what I want to do. So I wasn't against psychedelics and all that sort of stuff. I just wasn't for them, or I didn't have an opinion on them. But after seeing some of the research and some of the positivity, you can't ignore that at all. And really, it just all wraps into this whole argument of we've been ignoring a whole bunch of plants around the world, and an awful lot of research needs to be done by hopefully smarter people that have been leading us for the last 100 years.
Right. I mean, there is the research out there. It's just not U.S. based, and so a lot of times that it's just disregarded. Well, they didn't do it in the U.S. of A., so that doesn't count.
I mean, you've just tapped into a whole other. I mean, Dr. Larry, my medical supervisor. I mean, he was. He built the ER system here in Marin. He was in charge of Marine General's ER for 22 years. And that what activated him was, the obvious racism, whereby people of color here would always get busted for weed, and well, white wouldn't. Also, the alcohol. I mean, he'd see people drink themselves to death on a regular basis in ER, as you would. And in 22 years, the worst thing he'd seen with cannabis was panic attacks, and it's usually folks taking a puff of their kids' stash that they discovered, have a panic attack thinking they're having a heart attack, and end up in ER with lots of doctors laughing at them. You know what I mean? It's that, but not people drinking themselves to death and having liver failure or any of that sort of stuff. And so he came out of the cannabis closet in 2008, and is still on the Marin County Board of Health.
Wow.
He's serving his 5th term. Yeah, he's Dr. Larry is. I've got a. Of
course, you're in California. That helps.
It does. I mean, he's from Michigan. Originally, he went to Vietnam and then came back. And a lot of guys and girls that left the military stayed here because they were booted out here. Alameda was a big base just around the corner, and so since been shut down. But that's where a lot of them just end up in. If you go up in Sonoma, there's a vast amount of veterans, and the guys at Vet Connect, that's how they got started. They used to just walk around to parks and find vets that needed food and feed them. That's how they got started. Yeah, and it took off from there. And Rick himself was a skeptic, until he was convinced otherwise. And really, it's that magic. Everyone's a skeptic until they see the plant or try it for themselves or meet a vet or have some sort of first-hand experience. And so my main aim is to try and do anything in my power to facilitate those first-hand experiences. And my Take the High Road idea is really the best thing I can come up with that I think I could pull off.
Yeah, I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be amazing. If folks want to watch the documentary, what's the best place for them to do that?
It's on the YouTube channel of the client. So it was a joint production between myself. I funded the edit myself by basically being poor for 18 months. And partners gave me their filming budget, which gave me enough money to keep the lights on while I was doing it. So it's on their YouTube channel, which is very easy. It's youtube.com/Monster Gardens, all one word. And then you'll see vets grow all over the place. But if you go to the YouTube search engine and type in Vetsgrow, VETSGROW, or just punch it into Google, we're starting to get prolific and pop up because no one else has got that name, thankfully. And then you can see what I've written twice for High Times now. I've got several other articles planned. As I said, this podcast, which actually might have some High Times articles written as well. I've had a couple more articles in Benzinga that was republished on Yahoo as well, and that's talking about the idea of if you want to help if you want to help make cannabis legal, help vets grow. But I'm open to any conversation. Yeah, if anyone wants to talk to me, if anyone wants a part of this, everything I have done to date, the whole of Vets Grow, I literally just pulled it out of my behind, if excuse my French. I just made it up as I went along. I don't have set plans, much of some ideas of what I think will get the job done, and a need for collaborators and other people of a similar mind like yourself who are trying to spread the word and spread education and turn this ship.
Yeah,
because it is a big one, and you've already started to see some stupid reefer madness nonsense coming back out.
Mm-hmm.
I've no doubt that the fight's probably only just beginning, but for me, it's a fight that's pretty much over. It's veterans need help, and anyone that needs medical cannabis needs help. Veterans are just the best and quickest way, I think, to get us all there. So,
well, you can use that to appeal to those that are more on the conservative or the right leaning side. That's because this is an issue that appeals to them. So,
to me, it's even more of a for the money people, really. You started seeing things change in cannabis legalization when government types started seeing the huge potential of tax revenue. We live in a very capitalist society, the capitalist society, should we say, and money talks and BS walks. Right. So the changes are happening because of the money involved. Now, I'm very aware of that, but the fear is that the medicine gets left behind and it just becomes a big cash cow for everyone.
Right. Yeah, and that's all these states that are legalizing, they're not legalizing it because people need the medicine. They're legalizing it because they see it as a cash cow.
Right.
And then the patients are the ones that suffer as a result. And the black market still continues to thrive.
I would see there's one area where I would disagree with you on that, and that's because I have personal experience, and that's the state of Missouri. Because I spoke to the two veterans that put together the law, and I don't know if you noticed, but the Missouri medical cannabis law is the first law in the US that actually gives a percentage of tax revenue back to veteran services. And,
oh, wow.
I think it's a range of 2 or 3%. And veteran groups, and they get the first chance on permits. They're allowed to grow their own there. They're allowed to grow 6 plants by themselves, and they can.
That's awesome.
So they can keep themselves fully medicated there, and that's one of the reasons I've got an awful lot of connections to veterans out there of all ages, all up and down the spectrum, and they're one of the groups that are really, hopefully, helping me make this take the high road to reality. Because a few people from up and down their state reached out, and then I started coming across, there's a tiny houses community of veterans out there. There's an open space community of veterans out there. There's 2 or 3 veteran-owned and founded cannabis farms that are hopefully starting up. This is originally I had concocted a smaller plan. When it became clear that Take the High Road was just too big a chunk of effort and cash to try and get any sponsorship for this year, I already knew I didn't have enough time to do a Kickstarter. I'd run out of money myself, so I thought of doing a smaller project, and this was based upon these new friends that all of them just reached out from the blue. Some of them must have called some people I know up and got my number, but randomly they just got hold of me. And I'll tell you a little story about the fires in a minute from one of them, just to highlight what having a veteran friend is actually like. And they all started talking to me about potentially doing a quick test ride to Missouri to check out the laws, because I've actually talked to the 2 gentlemen that got the law passed, and both of those stories are, we don't have enough time here, trust me, but those stories are mind-blowing for the 2 gentlemen involved. But very quickly, Oklahoma went legal seemingly on a similar sort of model just after that. But I hoped it would be a template for all of the illegal states like your own to do the same thing, because it is a very, very well thought out medical law. The only problem was the project kind of got slammed because a lot of the good intent gets really kicked around and beaten up by the bureaucracies of all of the states where it's gone legal, as I'm sure you're aware, in the process. And so they were supposed to get their permits in. I think the permitting was supposed to start in the summer. It got delayed. It got pushed back through to October, November. And because of this, all of the interviews I'd set up and everything I was hoping to do all just went out the window, because they didn't know whether they were going to have a farm or whether they were going to get a license. And so it was all up in the air. That now, from what I understand, the licensing should have been done, and they should start to give out licenses in the next, I think, few months. But for veterans, I think it was October when they could actually get their medical card. It's a month to get your medical card, so you could apply in September, get it in October, and then you could grow 6 at home and 6 in veg. And so I have a couple of veterans who I'm actually actively trying to find them some used equipment so they can set up their grows. Because the other problem is, in these prohibited states, there's just no infrastructure there. There's no hydro stores, there's no nothing. And so, I mean, one of the problems that no one's talking about is, okay, your state's legal. It's still illegal to take a seed across a state line. Where the hell are you going to get your genetics from? That no one's talking about these sorts of interesting conversations, but they're there. And so someone's having to deal with them. But really, it's getting to the point now where it's almost farcical. Because of the arguments you mentioned earlier, there's no question about medical use. It's obviously not Schedule 1. There's no argument left for that. I think that's been left in the dust. It's just the political blowback, and it's the lobbies. It's the alcohol. It's probably the DA, I would imagine, as well, because they'll lose a chunk of budget if they're not chasing after.
That's right. That's right.
This is, as someone that's been a very, very deep studier of the American sort of industrial and political system over the last 24 months. These are very normal things. You see this in the Gilded Age. You see these political fights up and down the spectrum. They always happen. But the key for me was I had a legal team as well, a local cannabis lawyer team who helped me talk about the issues with veterans. I mean, it's actually quite far spread, because some of the stuff that no one's talking about that veterans are very concerned about is the right to own firearms.
Right. Yeah.
Veteran I know has a gun, either service related or otherwise, and a lot of the medical states are saying, And to me, that's ludicrous, because someone can wander into an off license, buy 6-pack with a gun on open display half the time. A lot of people, which is just. I've got no problem with guns, but guns and booze generally aren't a good mix. Every time I've tended to find, because someone always lets a shot off somewhere and ends up shooting something they shouldn't, and that's if you're lucky. So I can imagine I have a very interesting eclectic mix of friends here in California. I'm sure it's very similar in Texas, wherever you are. Guns are something that Europeans don't really understand, and I didn't until I had been out in actually Taylor, Texas. I had some ex in-laws out that way, and I'd never driven across something that flat and long. Again, coming from a small country with lots of rolling hills and countryside and rain.
Yes,
it was just this change of idea of what ground meant and what distance meant. But that's a very big issue that the veterans are concerned about, and it runs into a lot of the current political events that are big political push buttons for both sides. So I don't know where all of it will go eventually. There's a lot of big conversations to have, I think, in settling out, because no one's got a clue what to do with the DUI laws, and that's something I want to talk about on the way as well. I mean, I've got all sorts of ideas about making a big deal about making sure I have nothing on the bike or with any of the crew when we cross a state line from legal to illegal. But then there's the DUI thing. I mean, it's already started to raise its head, but I'd like to talk to the police about it, because they're eventually going to have to deal with it. And I'm pretty sure a copper doesn't want to bust someone for being a DUI that isn't a DUI. I mean, eventually, most policemen that I know are at least trying to reinforce the law of some sort. So it's just a question of how do we figure all of this stuff out? And it happens really with conversation. So I really, really appreciate you reaching out, Rachel, and giving me this opportunity to just blather on for as long as I have.
No, I appreciate it. I think what you're doing is amazing, and I 100% support the Vets Grow, and I think it is important for these guys to be able to do that, to grow their own medicine and to have access to it, let alone grow it, just having access to it in Texas would be nice without having to worry about becoming a criminal or being put in jail over it. Right. So I 100% support what you're doing, and we'll put links to everything you've mentioned today in the show notes, and then I'll put a link. We didn't mention it, but I'll put a link to your Twitter. Do you have any other social medias that you use?
I don't really. I've got a Facebook, but I can send you a whole bunch of links. I
Perfect.
quit social media before I started doing Vets Grow, and then got back into it because of Vets Grow. So I'm actually in the process of just finishing up a website with all of my stuff on it, because everyone keeps saying, there's no central place where my work is. It's scattered all across the internet. So I figured as I've got into the habit of writing again for High Times, I've started to find I've got an awful lot of crap I want to say. So I thought I'd put together a blog, and if I'm going to do a blog, might as well do a website. So that's what I'm doing pretty much all weekend when you reached out to me.
Well, send me a link to that, and I'll put that on the show notes for today's episode. And I've got a couple of veterans that I know I'm thinking of one off the top of my head that he owns a grow. So I may put you in touch with him. Maybe y'all can work something out. He's a vet, and he and some other vets that I know are working on a documentary as well about veterans that are having to basically become criminals to heal themselves. Right. So that sounds like something that, maybe y'all could
absolutely
collaborate on or cross promote or whatever.
I would say absolutely, please do. And as an open invitation, give my contact information to any veteran you think might be interested. Everything I've done has been a collaborative effort. I've been the sort of gibbering nervous wreck of energy that's pushing it. But it changes a little bit with everyone that gets involved with it, because I am very much just a rookie narrator getting my hands dirty for the first time. Literally, as I said, I didn't really have that many veteran friends over here until I started doing this. Now, and I even think I'm only on the tip of the iceberg as to how deep this can all really go and how bad it really is. And I've not even hit the bottom yet. And that's going to be about talking to as many veterans as possible. So, yeah, absolutely. New York, Massachusetts. If I'm going to pull off something as big as Take the High Road, one of the things I will have to do is have at least one or two veterans in every state to coordinate that state and find the veterans in the states who can do this. I've already talked to companies about getting the equipment, and that's my side of the bargain, is getting everything, but I'll need to find someone willing to do it, and it took me 3 months to find Al. So try and find 100 more across the country. I'm going to need a lot of help. So that's why the High Times. That's why I'm willing to talk to anyone that will listen. And if anyone out there wants to hit me, it's just vetsgrow@gmail.com is the generic box to just hammer me with any questions. And the only side note and warning there is, if you spam me, be prepared to get publicly ridiculed. I have a lot of very, very, very sarcastic veteran friends.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter yakking about this stuff all the time, and that's actually a very good place to find resources. But it's all about really educating as many veterans as possible, because even now there are resources for them and local groups all over the country, but not very well coordinated. It is, especially in states like Texas, it's underground for necessary reasons that I think are completely wrong.
Right.
And I guess the message from me to veterans out there is there are civilians that give a damn. And we just need to try and connect as many of us as possible and start putting together a united front to show the country it is a medicine. It
Yeah.
can help, and it's not to be discounted.
Yep. Well, thanks so much for your time, Matt. I will. I'm hoping to have this out next week since Monday's Veterans Day.
Anytime you want to talk to me again, I'll happily chat with you about anything cannabis related. I could give you a billion stories, but thank you again so much for the time, and for anyone listening, thank you very much for listening.
All right. Thanks a bunch, Matt. Have a good evening.
You too. Take care.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Show notes for today's episode can be found out at cannabishealsme.com/81. You guys go check out Matt's links and be sure you watch the Vets Grow documentary. And make sure you're following Matt on social media so you can stay updated on his project that's going to come out in 2020. We will be back here on Monday with another healing story. Until then, you guys have a great weekend. Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode of the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever podcast app you're using. Do you have a suggestion for a guest on Cannabis Heals Me? Send an email to podcast@cannabishealsme.com. We'd love to hear from you. Please do not take any information from Cannabis Heals Me or its guests as medical advice. Contact your licensed physician before taking cannabis or using it for medical treatments.